Before we get started on this monthly meeting, I'm going to show our antitrust policy notice. We do show this at the beginning of every meeting, and you'll find the full antitrust policy on the Linux Foundation website. If you're from a member company, you can ask any questions of our council, Andy Updegrove. Now, on this monthly call, this is the North America Europe call, we have a regular agenda of news, space to do work on our standards, space to do work on our reference material, and then, of course, any other business in case there's another topic you'd like to raise. In this particular meeting, we'll be having a couple of items. We'll be going through some important news around the project. We'll be having some discussion about our existing and our proposed specs, and we'll also have a look at some of the very important outcomes from work groups around the project. Getting started, the biggest news is that we've been going through our election cycle. So every year, more and more of our work groups have an election cycle to choose a chairperson. And this is designed to give the OpenChain project as a whole more continuity. This time, we've had some great community nominations that will formally go before our board in the end of March and be reviewed and confirmed by them then. And the chair people for 2024 will take their positions April onwards. We've completed 2 elections, specification work group, and that's the work group that uses this monthly call as their primary working space, and our education work group, which has their own series of calls to undertake activities. The current chairs of specification, it was co-chaired in 2023, so Chris Wood and Helio, and education chaired by Nathan Kumagai. Now, we've just completed the community elections, and from April, if the OpenChain Governing Board confirms the community election, we'll see the specification work group chaired by Chris Wood and education chaired by Andrew Katz. We actually have both on the call today. So, Chris, I'd like to congratulate you on your nominated second term as specification work chair, and Andrew on your nominated first term as education work group chair. So well done, and thank you for your energy in helping to push these things forward. Now, we're also going to continue elections in other work groups around the OpenChain project. We're going to have an election for the telco work group. It's taking place this month, February. There's going to be a nomination period between the 14th and 21st of February, and there will be a voting period between the 22nd and 28th of February. Other work groups throughout the year are expected to have elections as well. When we have an election, the existing chairs, of course, can be renominated. New people can step up, and basically we create a situation where the project has long-term sustainability in managing its various work groups around the world. And my goodness, we have so many. One of these activities is our AI study group, which is very new and has been very busy. 2 of the most recent calls have published recordings. I've just put them in the chat. We have a mailing list that people can join in. I mentioned at the start of this call that AI had just had a meeting. It finished about 2 minutes before we started this call. And on their most recent meeting, the AI study group worked on scoping. And the idea here is that the AI study group is looking at the challenge of AI compliance. And if they can scope it, and if they can look at it from the context of how we think about things in OpenChain, then that can be applied into having some useful outcomes that can be used for reference material and other activities to support the market. So this AI study group is a very exciting new activity in the OpenChain ecosystem and well worth following. So you can do that by joining the mailing list. And that is in the chat. If you've just joined us and you don't have access to it in the chat, I noticed a few people came in. I'm just reposting that link to the AI mailing list. The study group meets very frequently, so it's bi-weekly for people in Europe and North America, bi-weekly for Europe and Asia. And we're co-chaired by David Moore of Qualcomm and Matthew Crawford of ARM. So it's quite an exciting part of the OpenChain project and well worth having a look at. The latest meetings recording covering the scope discussion will be out very shortly. I hope to have it published within 24 hours. You'll find it on our website under the news section as usual. Right, that was our whistle-stop tour through the elections we were up to. And the elections we've done, with the specification and workgroup nominations from the community. And then onwards to one of the interesting things happening with the AI study group, which, as I mentioned, has a couple of recordings and has just been doing some great work. Now, on this particular call, we tend to do work on our specifications themselves. So our work groups do a lot of discussions about topics. They bring knowledge together. Occasionally, our work groups propose updates to our existing standards, or they might even propose new specifications. All of the material is funneled together through our processes and eventually goes to our steering committee and board. When it comes to the standards we work on, we have one licensing and one security standard. And I know almost all of you know that, but it's a big audience out there, and we want to make sure that everyone dialed in and everyone watching this recording is fully aware of what's going on. So the OpenChain project has a new ISO standard for security published last December, and a slightly older ISO standard for licensing. These manage open source processes for both of these topics. And we're never static because we're an open project doing standards in an open source way. We're continually taking in feedback and looking at material. You will see in the links on the slides, I posted them in the chat, open issues around security and licensing. On both of these topics, we're working on draft proposals for next generations of the standards. Those proposals are going to go into a public comment period. Our steering committee is going to provide us with the support we need to run a 6-month comment period and then a 3-month freeze period to make sure the widest possible audience can look at ideas and suggestions and give their own about the future of these ISO standards. Eventually, when the comment period and the freeze period is over, the results will go before our steering committee, which is the formal body for reviewing and deciding what to do next. Basically, we've already got a lot done, and we've had a lot of work done on taking issues that were submitted, reviewing them, and thinking of where to go next. To give you some examples, on the security assurance specification, we currently have 8 open issues and we've closed 24. Some of those closed issues were closed for building the ISO standard, but some of them have been closed subsequently as we refined it and improved it. On the license spec, the older ISO standard, we've currently got 6 open issues and 57 closed. As you can see there, that indicates the maturity of the spec itself. It shows how I think we've processed a lot of things over the years. Now, because we have the existing co-chair of the spec group on the call and the community proposed future solo chair, Chris Wood. Chris, I just wanted to, welcome you to the call and congratulate you on the community election, and to ask you, where would you like to go next as the chair in terms of the gathering the information, working on the issues, especially considering that we're about to enter a public comment period. So I suppose once we enter the public comment period, we'll have a call for new contributors. And how would you like to onboard them? Would you like to onboard them by working on these existing issues? Do you want to choose a different method of onboarding? Where would you like to go next? Just as an FYI, everyone should be able to unmute themselves, but if there is an issue with that, let me know. Yep, I've got confirmation that unmute seems to be working.
There it is.
There we go.
I had to find the right button in this as opposed to some of the other systems I use. Sorry.
We are a long way from standardizing video chat.
Yeah.
It's which is ironic given our domain, right?
Yep. They're trying to change us over to Teams, and so we've got half the people on Teams, half the people on Skype, half the people on Zoom, the various versions of Zoom. It's been a lot of fun trying to remember which system has which mute button where. Anyway, for on the subject of onboarding, let me think about that a little bit and maybe get some uh, feedback from some of the members that are already on the team about what they think might be the best way to handle that. I do want to take probably the next couple of weeks and go through both the specifications and look at the backlog of open items for them and see what and try and prioritize those.
When it comes to the public comment period, and this is just something I wanted to run by you, we got the instruction from the steering committee to run the 6-month public comment period and then 3-month freeze period. So, Chris, I was thinking of maybe kicking off the public comment period a little later in this month, say around the 21st or so. And that would give us 2 weeks lead time to just noodle on it perhaps. And when it comes to the public comment period, I'd like to, of course, pick your brains on the best way, but I was thinking options include I do a lot of social media outreach to try to get legal, procurement, other people in areas like LinkedIn networks, groups, raise attention to try to capture people onto these calls and also onto the GitHub issues. But I was wondering, you have a vast experience in standardization. Do you think that there's domains we should approach, organizations we should approach during the public comment period to make them feel included, to hear their voice? And do you have any tips on the best way to approach, let's say, organizations we mightn't have a relationship with yet?
Yeah, I'm thinking that from a licensing standpoint, we really would be well served to have some uh, legal voice or opinions about what they currently see in there and areas that we might want to look at that we haven't covered before, like the new quote unquote not open source licenses that are infecting the open source world, the source available licenses, and look at those kinds of things. From a software assurance, I think that we probably should see if we can find a few people who are invested in software assurance but haven't participated maybe in our version of the document to take a critical look at it and see what they think. I know we've had experts look at it in the ISO reviews, but I'd kind of value some outside look at it, not from necessarily from a grammatical and punctuation standpoint, but from an actual content standpoint of what are we missing? Are we missing a critical section in there? Could something use a little bit more amplification to make because of the growing threats in certain areas? So those are what I was thinking. But the other thing that I was thinking is I would really like to resolve all of the open issues because some of them have been open for a year or more, and we haven't really addressed them rather than piling on a whole new set of comments that we have to then look at the whole combined mess, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, in that case, we do have some leeway here to work on the existing issues. Uh, and perhaps when it comes to framing the public comments, we can open the door to people and say, of course, you can open a new issue, but here are existing issues as well. We're very happy to get feedback on that and try to encourage people to engage by helping us close open issues as opposed to just opening issues to share notes. But of course, we
Mm-hmm.
do want to be sure people can. Chris, you've got a lot of background I think you've been working with IEEE and so on for a long time. I don't think we've really approached IEEE. Do you think this might be something where we could make friends, pick brains, and so on?
I think it might be. I know that in one of the work groups that I was working on specifications with, they had started work on a licensing specification, and I told them I didn't really think that that would be appropriate as a standalone because the Linux Foundation has one at the time almost ready to go to ISO for review. I think that let me see if I can contact some of the people who were instrumental in that and see if they would be willing to take a look and maybe jointly do something.
Sure, absolutely. It would be fantastic to just have more hands at the table. The original licensing spec, incredibly, over, I
Hmm.
think the first 5 years had over 130 people contribute to it. So we've been very fortunate. But years have passed, new people have come along, and their experience would be fantastic. So
Yeah,
my
I
takeaway
think,
is oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just thinking that there are some uh, rather significant advances in thinking about software licenses and how they actually apply to the licenses or to the software that they are licensing.
Yeah.
And and I think that people like Heather Meeker and there are several other attorneys who donate their time to open source software specifically that I think might be a real good outside take a peek at our licensing and see where they think it might be weak or needs some amplification.
Yeah, that's a that's a really good idea. And Heather's an old friend, so very easy to
Okay,
reach out to her.
great.
Um, yeah, no, and also it's interesting because Heather has been involved on both sides of the table here, one on, pure play open source, but she's also been involved in thinking around some of the new licenses, the source available or similar type of licensing. So she might be able to provide us with multiple perspectives. I'll go and have a chat with Heather. I've been meaning to ask her to do a webinar for us for a while about work on things like how would we put it, open source adjacent licenses.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea because those types of licenses are starting to pop up in software, and people that are working in the open source licensing world are looking at them and how do we treat these? They say source is available, but then we've got all of these other considerations, and so it's introducing a whole new avenue of how do you go down the path of do you just reject those and send them to the commercial side for them to evaluate them, or do we do both? It's
Absolutely.
going to be fun to determine how each business wants to handle the compliance actions that are necessarily driven from those licenses because one foot over the line and all of a sudden you're in a commercial licensing space whereas and the source code is not available and you've got to buy a license for them, so it's something that's rather tricky.
Yep, this is also something that came up with AI, where this is an example as opposed to picking on a company, but Meta's licensing around Llama 2, once you hit 700 million users, it goes into a commercial licensing regime. So,
Mhm.
yep. Um, we had feedback from China. We had the government affiliated agency, CAICT. This is really for uh, the benefit of people who are newer. CAICT just said that they're seeing more and more discussions around licenses adjacent but different to open source, and they want to make sure that there's space to talk about that too. I just noticed that our other co-chair of the spec team, Helio De Castro, is right here as well. Helio, I hear from my spy network that you've been at FOSDEM, and I was just wondering if there was any feedback from Europe as everyone gathered about our licensing and security specs or market demands, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so until the midday of Sunday, that's my answer would be no, because I was basically run away against Deutsche Bahn. But for what happens exactly on the Friday and in specific things, there's a lot of discussions on how OpenSSF is crossing paths with the license part with us as well too, and discussions around SPDX and CycloneDX, but there's no directly mention about the security specs in general.
So the thing about SPDX and Cyclone is that people comparing the things, or is it another topic?
No, it's different. There's a common feeling with majority of the people there's that everyone is fed up of this feud between SPDX and CycloneDX, and you need to get in a common grounds. That's
Yeah.
the reality. But after these mentions, there's I think the situation inverted and becoming heated up again between the two projects on this after the frozen ends, which is unfortunately is not a good thing. But there's a majority of people that wants to get in a common ground between the two specs right now. That's the reality. What's happening? And
Yeah.
That's
that's
good.
around an OpenSSF side and in the compliance booth are exactly mentioning this. Mary was there too. Mary's
Oh, this is Mary Wang
yeah.
from I
Oh
see her
no,
on the
not just
slide. Hi,
okay.
Mary.
It's Mary number 2. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. That's the same kind of feedback that I've been hearing. And one of the things that I've been trying to nudge with IEEE is trying to bring all of the ANSI and SIT in the states for, governing bodies for specifications, is to try and start pushing toward maybe not not trying to say one is better than the other one, but trying to define a common template so that you can use whichever one best suits your company, your organization, the type of software that you're developing for both vulnerability information and licensing information, and producing it in a way that it is easily digestible by the end customer and your own internal operations so that you can manage the configuration over time of your software.
Yeah, this happening. There's plenty of accusations, right? The latest one is coming from the on the second DX Slack that people saying that the current SPDX model 3.0 doesn't work for anyone. Nobody understood that thing. So it's not nice. The situation right now is really far to be nice. There's no opening from the side of SPDX people. They are completely open to work. At least we're talking Gary and everyone. So we do have openness on the side, but on the side of Cyclone DX, they simply are not around on the FOSDEN, and they simply ignore. This is kind of a sad point of this, because It's just overcomplicating things for us. It's not really helping in anything. It's not making good for them, not make good for anyone. And Shane, there's a lot of mentions about the open chain, not the security aspect, but the open chain itself. Is most of the talks is always referring in anyway for the open chain ISO.
I'm heartened that OpenChain has never got bogged down too much in the politics around standardization, and I'm sympathetic to the challenge when politics spring up. So I hope that our community, with its high level approach and its space for people to talk, can, I guess, capture some of the positive collaboration between the companies and the imperative to just get stuff done. And on SBOMs, we want to make it easy for companies to use. So, Helio, it's really good to flag that
Yeah.
there's tensions and so on, so we can hopefully assist in reducing it. One thing I wanted to show, and this is not intended to suggest that we've solved for SBOMs, but our telco work group has been working on something which is about discussing what's a quality SBOM. And it was something they were noodling on for assessing for telecommunications companies to determine what would be a quality SBOM. And while what they have currently in the draft proposal isn't purely agnostic, it's basically looking at if you're using something like SPDX, what are the key things you'd need for it to be a quality SBOM from your suppliers. But that meta discussion of what's a quality SBOM, Helio, seems to touch on the topic you raised. Not fighting between formats, but rather determining what's going to solve the problem. What's a quality approach, and then various different SBOM formats could theoretically solve for that, I guess.
There's actually one good outcome that's happening right now. After 2 years, finally we have both rooms full of people that is coming from OpenSSF or compliance, everyone together. So for example, CISA people was inside, was with in the compliance day. So now officially security people is talking to the compliance people and starting to understand that they're not alone, they cannot do it one side or another, and which is really great. So we are able to talk in between everyone on this. It's so well deserved then. So the talks, we can starting to see talks coming from the OpenSSF world and in the compliance room and understand what they are doing. So I think that it opens a completely new opportunity to us finally starting to cooperate between each other.
That's good. That is so important. And I hope to have more interaction between us and OpenSSF. I had a chance to talk with Omkar a little bit in San Diego 2 weeks ago, and he's going to have a look at where we're at in security. And I'd like to make sure that OpenSSF and OpenChain cross-reference each other more as we move forward. Because naturally what we're doing in security is kind of an organic place for companies to then look around and say, well, that's some basics. Where do I go next? And look at something like OpenSSF. And likewise, what they're doing, if a company is brand new and thinks, oh my God, this looks complex, where can I start? Something like our ISO standard can assist. So I'm hopeful in that. But I think our path with standards is always going to be slow. It'll take a while for momentum to build around security. It took a while for licensing. I wanted to raise something on this call briefly because we have a few other items to cover, but one thing I wanted to raise, and this is intended to be brief, don't worry. But we had a discussion about a contribution specification as a concept, and that discussion happened last year, but it didn't get very far in the end. So I wanted to reignite that discussion just to pull the material together. I put this slide into the chat with links. So I just went back and looked at where we were at with this discussion. And I looked at the draft material and I tried to improve the formatting so it was easier to read. And my purpose wasn't to suggest that we, start putting lots of our resources into looking at the ideas behind a contribution spec per se, but to tidy up where the conversation was at, and make it easier to look at what we actually have. These definitions aren't important. The things like, what we have is some notes on having a policy or similar if a company is considering contribution, but we have very little meat on this. We don't have enough material to make a draft specification. Not really, not yet. We don't have enough material to make a solid guide for corporate contribution. So I wanted to pull what we have together, and I tried to do so for the purpose of saying we had this proposal to maybe do a contribution spec. We have open issues, we have some draft material. Apart from our ISO standards, maybe this is something we can look at in the coming weeks and months to either continue discussion or to close it off as opposed to leave it hanging. What do you think about that, Chris and Halio?
I think that from my perspective, that maybe as a open chain policy, it might be a lot better received than as trying to submit it as an ISO spec.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, I think that's very valid. And we have all of these options. We can have, we could say nope and shut it down. We could say, oh, this is going to be some reference material, or we could say this is going to be a guide specifically, or we could say this is going to be a spec, but not an ISO spec, or we could say this is going to be an ISO spec. So we have a whole spectrum of options to look at. Yeah. The only reason that I think we should do something is because if we just leave it hanging, then it's a discussion online, and people will think, what happened? So for housekeeping purposes, whatever we do, I think maybe we should try to go somewhere with this and set some direction in the next few months.
Yeah, I agree with that because it'll give people a very clear idea of what not requirements, but what the
Yeah,
facts are about how you run the business of the Open Chain Foundation
right.
and what they can and can't do or should or shouldn't do when they first come in, rather than having them stumble and then say, oh no, you can't do that, or no, you've got to fill out this first. So I think it might be more friendly to getting people to participate in the process.
Mhm. Yep. Okay. We'll have a look at this and we'll bring it back in the future. I mean, to the earlier points, then my takeaway is, Chris, you want to work on the open issues and try to address them as opposed to issue proliferation. So we'll try to work out a graceful way to do that while at the same time doing the public comment period to help get reviews and bring in new people.
Okay,
Uh,
Jerry just offered a link on chat to what they've been doing.
right.
Is that for
Oh, yes.
contributions?
Yes, this is a more detailed guide, a how-to, as opposed to the overarching what, where we normally sit.
Yeah, correct. Like Shane said, that this is kind of giving more like guides, like how to really do the contributions. But yeah, I think there could be some, I don't know, crossing points between, let's say, the spec or whatever we want to call it, and this one.
Yep, absolutely. And there's also
Sounds good.
yeah, it certainly does. So I talked with Anna briefly from To Do Groups. So she's leading To Do, and I met her in San Diego, and I had a brief conversation. She wants to see our contribution discussion continue if possible. So maybe we can bring her in as well and try to have her on one of the monthly calls as things are discussed. Okay. If it's okay with you, Chris and Helio, I'd like to dive forward into the reference material section because we do have some interesting stuff to cover today.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, I
Uh,
see Mary is unmuted. Do you have something? Hi, Mary. I hope you enjoyed FOSDEM.
yeah, I have a reflection on the open source outbound open source contribution part. In this first theme, there is a question. I think someone questioned about, for the CRA, it's related like, for example, if a company who sells a computer which includes a Debian operation system, if this open source Debian open source do not fulfill this license compliance or security compliance, then whose responsibility it is when they sell the computer if something is wrong with this Debian? Then the answer is like, okay, it's a product owner or company owner who has a responsibility, but it's kind of nothing, no responsibility from the Debian at all. But for this contribution part, I mean, if all the contribution process or owner fulfill this license compliance and security compliance, these two ISOs, it will reduce this risk for all of this downstream commercial company. So my thinking is like this contribution could be the spec or ISO in some way to kind of make sure all of these upstreams or open source project fulfill these two ISO standards. Just a thought.
It's a good thought, I think. It touches on something that came up again and again over the years, which is the concept that ultimately, if we want to solve things like compliance, we have to solve final upstream, the projects. Yeah.
And the answer who I think it said who work for the CRA give to this Debian is like, even though CRA doesn't require you, Debian, let's say project, fulfill this vulnerability or security issues, but since many companies use it, it's good to have a SBOM or security report for each distribution. So no requirement, no hard requirement, but suggestion to have this SBOM and security report. Yeah.
No, it's a really good point. And ultimately, if you think about this is a comment which goes below where we often operate. Let's say our work on discussing contributions so far is talking about if I'm a company, what would I need? For instance, I'd need to have a program, I'd need a policy, I'd need personnel who are responsible. That's where we got to on contributions, same as we did with licensing. But if you start heading down to the how-to level, like where To-Do Group operates, what's one of the things you probably could usefully contribute apart from literally code? And that's things like, well, building an SBOM for the project to make it sustainable would be a really good contribution. So, you know, I think, Mary, you're touching on a topic that's going to be close to the hearts of a lot of strategic managers charged with sustainability and especially dealing with things like the CRA. Otherwise, you're just repatching and repatching the software to get the records in place.
Yes.
Sorry, Mary, that was really useful. We have something cool as well, which I think will be useful in a very similar thread, which might actually go directly on from what Mary said. So there's work going on around our reference material. And one thing I wanted to flag is that our training slides, the very first reference material we ever made, are finalizing an update. I've just put this link into this chat because you can still make comments on it. Some people have. Thank you very much. And these training slides are where we started, you know, starting with what is intellectual property through to contribution. And it'll be a significant update to our original material. But related to what Mary was talking about in, you know, essentially how do you get more sophisticated with dealing with open source, with dealing with things like CRA? We're beginning to touch on this. The legal work group had a presentation very recently about maturity models. And To cut a long story short, a link in the chat shows the recording. Andrew and Stephen, both on this call, gave a great presentation about maturity models. They have a maturity model approach built around ISO 5230, our standard for license compliance, and explaining how a company can get started there and then iterate to build maturity around that. And that mental model of getting better at things, making them more sustainable, seems to be a common thread of where we're going in every direction. Whether it's how do we approach SBOMs? Well, we probably need to think about what's quality here generically, and we need to have approaches that are friendly to options, friendly to working together. When it comes to internal license management, how do you iterate and improve? When it comes to engaging with projects, how do you go beyond the most simple engagement but into lasting engagement? So I think maturity modeling in various ways will be front of mind in multiple domains. But what we have at Legal Workgroup is a very practical way to do maturity modeling around specifically our ISO standard. I wanted to give the floor to Andrew and Stephen to maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Shane. That's a really great introduction. Is it possible to share my screen?
Absolutely.
Maybe share a
I've
couple of
just
slides.
stopped my share, so over to you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the work that we're doing and presented to Legal Working Group and also at Summit, of course, in Tokyo, is very much based on that theme, Shane, as you were saying, which is, okay, how do we get better in all of our capabilities that we need when there's a bewildering, probably array of things to be done? But then how do you define and measure how well you're doing? Very quickly becomes the question. And let me just check. Is my screen
It's
not sharing? All right.
Oh, there we go. It's
there we
just,
go.
yep,
Just go in there. Okay. So I'll leave the slides open in the same style. About five minutes or so, Shane. Shall I sort of try and keep it to that?
Yeah, you can take 10 if you wish.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So this question of, well, how do we define what is good and measures of different maturity when we've got this fantastic foundation in the 5230 specification? So capability maturity models are a relatively well-known method of looking at capability, and there's a definition there of saying it's a framework for measuring your different capabilities with this aim of driving continued improvement, and they are very useful things, especially in wider community-based approaches, as they enable people to sort of have a common language and a common basis for then benchmarking as to how well we're doing, rather than wasting time defining measures. You can quickly then get into, okay, here are the priority areas, this is how we're going to respond, and this is some of the best practice that we can share with each other. These models have very clear and simple elements within them. First one, of course, is to have a basis for defining maturity. And we're using this is based on client work and wider conversations we've been having with people at OpenChain. This is a scale 1 to 5, where you can take a view that, well, if we're OpenChain compliant, we should at least be in level 3 of definition of our capabilities that we need. But if you then get a little bit more sophisticated and you're beginning to produce metrics or understanding or finding ways to define your performance to the next level and then managing your overall system and then ultimately optimizing it, you may end up towards a score of 4 or 5 in the piece. The other area that we wanted to make useful and practical rather than academic exercise was to really deal with clear concepts that would say, okay, well, we're giving ourselves a score, but what do we actually do? Do we need to fix something which is process-based? Is it about the information that we have? Is it something to do with systems or tools, or is it to do with the people, organizational structure, roles and culture, behavior and training? And so those are 4 different lenses that we've built into the model to allow us to rapidly assess how we're doing against those pieces, because when you've got a good view of that, then you can quickly move to, well, we need to prioritize our work on process, we need to prioritize our work on tools. And these, of course, are the kind of things that if you're doing well in all 4 of these areas, then you're much more likely to be able to embed and sustain change for the long term. So with those basic concepts of the 4 different types of capability and then a scale, you can then see how we're working with people to assess, well, how are you doing against perhaps a blue line, which shows a target, and a red line, which is your measured score. And I'm very much thinking, certainly in our experience, and I think we're seeing out there, different organizations may come to this with a different perspective. We want to be, in terms of their ultimate target, we may be driving really hard to build our reputation and profile and to be a good citizen and contributing well to the community, whereas others may be saying, we're just getting into this and we need to make sure we are achieving good standard, but we're not yet going to be leading the field. So those scores between 3 and 5 are where different organizations may be setting their targets. So in the model itself, we've mapped all of the different activities that are stated within the 5230 specification. And in doing that, there sort of an inherent layering came forth, where you could think about perhaps 3 different levels of how you might need to think as an organization. So the governance, strategy and oversight piece, a middle layer of enablement and sort of resource allocation and development, and also assessment, performance management, and then the core kernel of OpenChain delivery in terms of the activities that you can see there in terms of obligations, bill of materials, compliance, and compliance artifacts. And we've done some work to flesh that layer out into more specific detail. So you'll recognize the dark green headings, they all come from 5230. And we've broken out some explicit process activities that to achieving compliance and successful quality management, if you like, of each of those different activities. I won't dwell on that. I'm happy to come back to that later. And then the next step, of course, then for each of those areas, the dark green box, you'll find there is we've worked up now a complete question set. And the question set, this is the one that's been shown here, is the example for bill of materials against the 4 different colors of people and organization, process, information, systems capability. The maturity model has the means to sort of explore and dig into, well, are you optimizing? Are you just working well but have defined and yet to be performing? So you can end up giving yourself a score 0 to 5 in 4 areas for each of the 12 areas, the dark green areas that come from the specification. And that level of data gives you then something to give you effectively a dashboard. You can benchmark how you're doing against plan. You can benchmark how you're doing against particular aspects of the 4 different types of capability. And as I said at the beginning, really, I think it's something that will enable organizations to think, well, of all of the things we can do in the next 12 months, though, we know what our roadmap needs to be, because we'd like to prioritize our focus on these areas, because each of these different capabilities may have a different priority or a risk profile for the organization. And so I think this model helps organizations pick their way through those questions and develop a roadmap or an implementation plan as a result. So that's the model that we're developing, and this is something that we're very keen to get input and collaboration with people, and we're publishing the material. Just a quick wander through a couple of the case studies. So we've definitely experienced this in a number of different ways. Larger technology firms where they've already got a clear OSPO established and a clear leadership commitment that they're looking to open source and to quality open source management, but they're looking to recommit, if you like, or they may have inherited or acquired or developed a number of different projects, and they're wanting to bring cohesion to their open source activities and consistency. And a model like this enables us to take a snapshot team by team and saying, okay, well, here are the priority areas of how you can drive for this next standard and evolution. And another really interesting area we're seeing is in the side around risk management, and certainly from an insurance provider point of view, we're seeing a lot of interest in having a capability model which enables in supply chain, in indemnities and warranties, and also in mergers and acquisitions. So there's a recognized opportunity to be able to define what good quality open source management looks like, which would actually enable insurance companies to offer better pricing for risk in those two scenarios, and that's something that's very actively being explored right now. Shane, I don't know if we've got time, if we can perhaps mention also the Corinthian project on the way through.
Sure.
Andrew,
Sure.
did you want to chip in, because that's a build from this wider point around supply chain?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And yes, apologies. I'm sort of wandering around outside the State of Open conference at the moment, and I can't get my camera to work, so apologies for that. Yes, so the Corinthian project fits into this because largely we have determined that the capability maturity model acts as a very effective way of enabling risk to be determined. And of course, organizations that are interested in risk include insurance companies, and also any sort of legal transaction involving open source materials. So whether that's an open source supply agreement within the supply chain, or whether it's the acquisition of a company that develops software using open source, there's going to be legal documentation involved in implementing that transaction, and the lawyers are going to be focused on the risk. So what we've done is we have taken the OpenChain specification of the 5230, and we've used that as the basis for developing a set of due diligence materials and reps and warranties, which we have made available under a free and open source license, very liberal license, and we're publishing them under the Corinthian project, which is a project hosted by the Eclipse Foundation, with the intention that this is going to be an open source project to enable fundamental template precedent legal documents to be developed. And what we're hoping is that they will become some form of industry standard. We're already talking to insurers about who want to be involved in this as well, so they can write insurance products based on the liabilities and the risk management that they reveal. But the CMM becomes very important here because, of course, by being able to determine the level of risk, it makes it a lot easier for the underwriters to understand the risk and therefore price the product appropriately. So a very, very sort of rapid whistle-stop tour of what Corinthian is about. And you can find out more by linking through to the URL. At the moment, we don't have any materials up there. They're ready to go. They just need to be reformatted. So the first materials, should appear within the next week or so. I'm hoping. But just as a corollary to that, Stephen, I just wonder whether you could talk very briefly about certainly on the roadmap section of the CMM, whether I've been having sort of conversations recently about sort of OKR outcome key results methodologies, and it seems that this aligns very closely with that. So I don't know if you could just sort of briefly sort of mention a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Andrew. So in terms of the OKR methodology, which a lot of organizations use to provide clarity and so they're driving performance, and also what are the steps we need to get there. It's a very popular method that fits very nicely in with the capability perspective, especially from the point of view of the 3 layers that are built within the model. So the core strategy layer is really key, and the the outcomes that are being sought for the organization. So, for example, it could be something to do with brand and reputation as a contributor in open source, or it could be commercial aspirations in terms of customer delight and speed to market and the like. These are the outcomes that would very much set the framework that we would test and challenge and understand the way in which the open source program has been configured to respond to those strategic drivers. And then, of course, the key results will be the steps which then could be tangible elements of capability that need to be in place, which is where the capability maturity model goes. So the maturity model fits very nicely alongside this aspect, because the OKR framework gives a very good steer and is compatible to the way in which the capability model would then test for those key results against those outcomes. Just very briefly, we of course recognize there's other really good work going on in a number of different places, and there's already been done around capability and maturity modeling. Very interesting conversation with the team at Finos this afternoon. At the state of OpenCon, they have a whole framework in place in terms of driving for readiness, open source readiness, but they were really pleased to hear about the way in which we are broadening out and deepening the OpenChain compliance specification. So as a tool and as a methodology, I think they're going to be very complementary. It fits within the wider approach of the to-do downflation work. So the to-do maturity model provides evolution sort of measures at organization level, and this model gives you the next step of the ability, if you like, to compare teams and programs and projects sort of consistently in different formats. And then some of our work in China has meant that we've really had some interesting conversations with the CAICT, and they have a tool and method and capability of analyzing the practice in terms of a number of different organizations, and they've published a list of the top 10 activities that lead to organizations being successful in implementation. So there's lots of related work in this area, and we're keen to connect and make sure we produce something that's useful and not duplicative. And with that very much in mind, we are taking part in calls like this, and we're open to suggestions and challenge and collaborators as we develop this, because we could take this in a number of different directions. And we're going to be working with some organizations. We're going to do some sort of interviews to effectively structure the use cases for that, and to build that out into perhaps a sort of a user guide for it. And of course, we're wanting to explore whatever the top of mind key risks, themes, and topics are, because if you like, each of these themes and topics that are being explored at the moment, you can see on the right hand side, they will reflect, or they will be reflected in that slice through the three different layers of the maturity model, and then there'll be questions. So there could be ways in which we could highlight a particular challenge or area. So, for example, the way in which DORA or CRA legislation frameworks may or may not impact organizations. We could be illustrated looking at the different layers of organization that are in the model. So we're keen to hear what people think as to how useful this kind of thing might be in their process, and for people to join us as we explore particular themes and topics, or develop the model more. Shane, I think we've gone a little bit over the 10 minutes, but we're getting close to the end there. So thank you very much for the time.
Really good to have this roundup. So, for those of you on the call, clearly we want to make sure that there's space for this type of reference material to breathe outside of our smaller groups like the legal work group. So the reference material on maturity modeling will be, I'm going to be seeing it in the education work group. That was the outcome of legal, to pass it to education. And Andrew will be taking a lead role in education from April onwards. So that's nice. And maturity modeling is going to be critical. So I'm very glad, Andrew and Stephen, to have you on board there. And, I just wanted to do a quick call back in the last few seconds. Chris, thank you for helping provide context on, what you'd like to see on the issues as we close, and Helio as well. And Helio, I wanted to give special thanks for flagging some tensions arising in the SBOM arena and the current status of that. If there's anything we can do to assist in making sure that things just work more smoothly, please let me know. And I'm very heartened to hear that we have a great history of people like Gary over at SPDX working collaboratively with everyone. I'm glad people like Gary and yourself got together in FOSDEM, and hopefully we can all brainstorm the best way forward here. I just noted you were unmuted, so I went silent there.
Well, so this I really don't know where I should go. That's this we need to contact exactly the people from the Linux Foundation and the people from the Silent Cyclone DX. And that is like a neutral. We need to find a neutral tenant between the both projects to start the conversation. Maybe we can be this neutral tenant at some point.
I'd love if we could positively contribute here. I mean, ultimately, we just need to make sure that the supply chain can easily use SBOMs. Yeah.
It's really going to become necessary as time goes forward, especially, and those last two presentations were wonderful. And I think, have y'all looked at integrating the software assurance work into your maturity models and assessments for M&A kind of work? I think that blending those two things together is going to be critical to people saying, yes, I've got a good product, or no, this product isn't really worth as much as you're trying to sell it to me for as part of your business. And I think that the legal community would really agree with that. But I think if the two models can somehow be blended together to give you a dashboard that demonstrates here are all of your compliance actions that you're trying to touch on. And so that leaves you the basic model, and then you've done your assessment and your ring covers 99% of it. That's really good. And it would be a good way of showing people just as at a high level that you do have a good product, that you're solid. And of course, the SBOM will just flow out of that and document your goodness, because it'll contain items from not only the licensing world, but also the software world from a vulnerability and risk standpoint.
That's an excellent point. And yes, thank you so much for raising that. And that's definitely something that's on our individual roadmap. We want to focus on the license compliance side and all of the aspects of the whole OpenChain specification that relate to that. But in the same way that OpenChain itself is looking at other aspects around security and vulnerability and also AI, etc. But the key is that, first of all, we don't want to invent anything new that somebody else is already working on. And secondly, we want to basically unify the API so that all of these different methodologies that people use in different parts of their business, we will try and make them all compatible. So I think that's a really good point, and that's definitely something that we'll put on the roadmap.
Yeah, you've got a brilliant start there, and I applaud you for working one thing at a time, because that way you've got a more comprehensive look at it. But if it's on your roadmap, that's wonderful, because I haven't heard anybody else talking about doing what you're doing there.
That's really reassuring. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a personal take, so this isn't GM hat on, but I'd love if we can run further in the conversation with maturity modeling on licensing and security to try to make sure that if there's any company saying I'm doing open source, where are we at? They have more guidance. It's certainly something that's come up a lot in Asia. All right, we're a little bit over time, but we had, I think, some really good stuff to talk through. Any other business? All right, if there's no other business, we're going to proceed to close of meeting. Chris, in the next meeting, how about we dive in and actually just roll up our sleeves, work on the open issues, get stuff closed? What do you think?
Yeah, I'll go through them this week, and you want to start with the licensing spec first and then do software assurance, or vice versa. I think it'd be easier if we try and manage it that way.
Sure. I'm gonna call Helio in here. Helio, what would you like to do? Licensing or security first?
Yeah.
Well, security first. This is obvious. Let's make this in a way to give and kudos for the people from OpenSSF being near us. So we're looking for security first.
Okay.
Okay. I'll go through them
Security.
this week, and Shane, I'll send you and Helio, I'll send you both the kind of my prioritization of the list as I see it, and then we can noodle it around between ourselves before the next meeting.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Leo. Thank you, Andrew, Stephen, Mary. Thank you for your comments as well, and Yari too. And everyone, be safe, be healthy, be happy. And if you're starting your day, enjoy your day. If you're finishing it, enjoy that. And if you're in Asia like me and it's 2 a.m., I don't know what we're doing, but we're doing something. Take care.
Say good night.
Good night.
Good night, Shane. Thank
Thanks,
you so
everybody.
much.
Okay,
It's
bye-bye
brilliant.
now.
Thank you.